Hello, we're live on GBC News. This is the Showbizz segment. My name is Valerie Danso. So as we do every time on the show, we split it into 2 or 3 parts, sometimes 4, where we highlight African creativity, especially big talents from Ghana. So today I'm going to split the show into 2 parts. We are going to be doing art, the first part, and then music on the second part. My first part is an artist. I would personally like to call him an installation artist, but I'm sure he has a different name that he wants to call himself. He's a big shot when it comes to art. His art is amazing. When I first heard of him, I thought he was a politician or a businessman, and then they had to explain to me that no, there's an artist who's actually called Ibrahim Mahama, who's doing amazing when it comes to art. We're going to take a break on his video. When we come back, we'll meet Ibrahim Mahama, the artist. So here's a break on his video.
I've always been interested in how crisis can always be a starting point of production. Earlier on in my practice, I used to work with a lot of traditional mediums, but later on, I became a lot more interested in the poetics of materials that have been used to convey or move things from one place to the other. It's basically these jute sacks that I use in transporting food, and later on used in transporting charcoal. And then when it's stitched together, we install it in public spaces. So the idea is to be able to intervene within these public sites.
Okay, so that was your introduction to Ibrahim Mohamed's work, some of his work. Welcome to the studio.
Thank you very much.
So I'm very, very happy and honored to interview you. We're supposed to have this chat a couple of weeks, and you couldn't fly in from Tamale because there was something with the flights.
Yes.
So it is like an honor to have you in here.
Thank you very much.
So you're in my hot seat. We're about to have fun. So welcome. Did you fly in this morning, or you came in during the week?
No, I flew in yesterday.
You flew in yesterday. Do you have other engagements? Are there other things you're coming to do in Accra?
No, I came just for this.
Okay. Yeah. The first question anybody would ask is, Accra is the city, is the hub. Everybody comes to Accra. You do amazing work when it comes to art. Why are you based in Tamale? Why? Is there a special reason? Like, why?
There are many reasons.
Okay.
One is that I was born there, but I was raised in Accra.
Okay.
So I've lived in Accra for 30 years now. But in university, when I started making art more seriously, I always thought it was important to go back to
University.
Tamale.
Wait, let's cut in. University where?
Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology.
Yes,
Tech. Yeah. So I finished my undergrad in 2010. Around the time, I thought it would be good to somehow establish a base back in Tamale. As you said yourself, everything is centered in Accra.
Yeah.
So I think it's also important for artists and practitioners, not just artists, also for practitioners to also go back to some of the spaces that they do come from, because those places also do need opportunities and people who are working and excelling within certain fields who can inspire.
You have to speak up a bit.
Yes, okay.
Okay. So in Tamale, what exactly, if we follow you to Tamale, what exactly are we going to find? What has the impact of what you do impacted on the youth, or probably lovers of arts?
In 2014, I decided that I was going to build a studio in Tamale so I could move back there and live. So my father, he works in construction. He had this land that he had owned for 35 years. And when I discussed the idea with him, he was very generous and supportive and said, yes, why don't you build a studio? Because he's also interested in the idea of young people living in Tamale and helping in development, because he's lived there his entire life and contributed significantly. So we started building the studio, and a year later, I was having conversations with certain artists, older artists in Accra, and I thought, oh, it might be interesting to actually establish an institution in Tamale which actually highlights the careers and practices of older artists. So we set out to build this institution called the Savannah Center for Contemporary Art, SCCA, Tamale. So last year in March, we opened the institution, and it's dedicated mainly to art exhibitions.
Okay.
And also, like, we are currently in conversations with architects, engineers, musicians, and all that, specifically creating an institution that somehow looks back in the past and honoring the works of practitioners, people who have contributed significantly to the development of culture within the scene, but yet their works have somehow been neglected.
Okay, well, okay. So this, I just wanted my audience, everybody, to have a feel of what you're doing and why you're in Tamale. When we actually come to the nitty-gritties of the institution, we'll have the visual pull-up. So when you were in university, that's when you decided to take art on as a profession, full-time, no?
Yes.
Did you have anybody saying that, oh, art doesn't pay, why don't you go into engineering or something of the sort, a white-collar job?
Yeah, well, I guess it's very difficult for people to understand art to a certain level, not just in Ghana. It's a worldwide phenomenon. Even when you go to the US and the UK and many other developed countries, it's not, people always think that, oh, if you live abroad, then it's very easy for you to become an artist because society really does understand the culture. Of course, it is there, but art has always been in the periphery. People never really understand the significance of art and why, let's say, the state has to fund art institutions. That's why even in this country, for all these years, since the museum was built in the 1960s by Kwame Nkrumah, it was never developed or built upon till now, because successive governments have never really understood the significance of what those institutions are and why they have to be developed. So, of course, people, your friends and family, people are worried for you. So they would say, oh, why don't you study something? Or why don't you, if you're an artist, why don't you turn it into some kind of a business? Of course, sometimes art can be made into a business, but the business of art, in terms of the forms that it takes, is for the purposes of developing the practice in itself. When scientists are in the lab developing, let's say, vaccines and things like that, medicine, it's not really for the sake of business. It's for the sake of advancing science. And it's the same way that art also operates, that when an artist is interested in a subject, he has to push it to its limits, whether it brings money or not. And that's where the problem mostly is.
Okay. So would you call yourself a celebrity artist, an African celebrity artist?
I've never heard of that before.
Oh no, I'm coining the title for you. Would you call yourself that?
No, not at all.
What would you call yourself? I'm
just an artist. I'm very humble about the things that I do. Though I have worked significantly around the world, and it's very easy with regards to a lot of people do recognize me for the work that I do, but for me, I've always thought that it's like a service, that I'm giving to people. Because through the work that I've done, even using Tamale as an example, it's made a huge difference. Ordinarily, people would have never had an arts institution to visit in Tamale. So for instance, if you live in Tamale or in the north, you realize that there aren't institutions, there are no parks, even like Accra. There are no parks, there are no museums to go to. The only thing you can do is to go for an outdoor and a funeral or go for a party or something, or go to the club. But at least we need institutions where young people can go there to reflect. And these institutions can somehow affect the way in which society operates. So for instance, our institution doesn't just deal with visual arts, we also deal with film, archaeology, we deal even with like looking into tech and all that, because currently one of the things we're doing is actually even working with young kids within the communities and villages and teaching them how to understand the drone technologies and even how to fly them. But ordinarily this wouldn't happen if we do not take responsibility as practitioners in order to make these interventions.
Okay. I'm going to say that the reason why I asked you if you call yourself a celebrity artist is because of all of these shows that you have exhibited your art in, and then you have also done solo shows. I mean, I'm seeing Material Effects, Eli and Eddie, the Broad Arts Museum, Civil Occupation, Ellis King, like lots and lots of stuff. Canon Wax, that was in Jamestown here in 2013, and then Factory of Machines and Trucks in Kumasi as well. You've done a lot of these things. I know, because I've spoken to a lot of artists and people in the creative arts industry, that financing is a big challenge. All of these things that you have done, par your hard work, you need financing as well. I can't say it's been, I can't even say it's been easy, but can you tell us your journey? If somebody's watching us and inspired by you, how you were able to overcome the financial hurdle, or if you found a way around it, if you could share.
Yes, I've always been, for me, art has always been top priority. Yeah, so whatever I have to do in order to raise money to produce my work, I do. So when I was in school, in uni, I used to do, in anyone in university who is in the arts will understand the term, where, yeah, so commercial work, where you take jobs from people and you do
we
it for
call
them.
it journalism.
So
we call it journalism.
yeah,
Okay,
so we did, we were big time commerce, so doing paintings of families, drawings for friends. Then I would use these monies in order to buy materials for experimentation. There is, even within the art world, as we know it, there are a lot of artists who are quite comfortable and very conservative with regards to what an artistic form can be. So for instance, some artists believe that with the God-given talents that they have to be able to paint and draw, that is where art begins and that is where art ends. Because in the history of art, the depiction of the human form has always been the ultimate. So for instance, if I draw a human being, it somehow has more significance or importance than if someone puts
like a jute bags together. To cover
but
stuff.
What you do not understand is that the jute sacks, we are all dealing with the human condition. Then sometimes art transcends the figure of the human. Sometimes in other objects can absorb the human condition in such a way that they speak back to us in a way that we, in terms of our body, cannot articulate that condition. So I somehow understood that it was important to use the experiences and whatever I had studied from school, because back at KNUST in the painting department, our lecturers were very, like they were pushing us a lot to think about art beyond the form of the human. So we started looking at spaces around the community and things like that. So for us, I thought that it was important to be able to make work that people understood, like maybe if you draw someone and then use that money in order to be able to fund these ones
that are not commercial.
But eventually, when they become significant, they become commercial.
Yes.
So for instance, some of the artworks that I would sell on, like some of the major installations that I would do, like there is a piece which I made for an exhibition in London a couple of years ago, and there were a few of them that were sold to a few museums around the world. So if you put the total value of the work together, maybe it will be like $1 million. But if the work is fragmented and sold maybe to a couple of institutions, then, so for instance, you are looking at a piece selling for about $400,000. So the institution in Tamale is actually a result of some of these monies that I earned, which I use in building the institution.
Okay. What's the biggest platform you've been on? What's the biggest platform that you've had to exhibit your work?
There have been, okay, so there are two major exhibitions in the world that are very, very important. One is called the Venice Biennial.
Yes, it's here.
And then one is called a Documenta. So the Venice Biennial is like the World Cup of artists, and it happens every 2 years. But in so many years, when it had, Venice started in 18-something, but for a long time, there had never been a Ghanaian artist living and working in Ghana who had been invited to the Biennial before. So in 2015, when I was just finishing art school, I was the youngest artist that was ever invited there, and also the first Ghanaian. Of course, 2 years later, I participated in the exhibition again, and then 4 years later, with the first Ghana Pavilion in Venice, which was curated by Nano Furiata and designed by Sir David Ajayi. So, and Documenta, which was in 2017, which, so there have been really some major, sometimes I do forget.
So there's been quite a few major ones, but you've been on the Venice Biennial one. Okay, so I can safely call you a celebrity artist then. We'll take a break and then watch some of the stuff you've done and come back into the studio to chat. So here's another break on one of Ibrahim's installations.
My name is Ibrahim Mahama. I'm originally from Ghana, where I live and work in Tamale. The work I'm presenting is called Non-Orientable in Cancer. It's made up of various compositions of different elements, specifically these boxes that are normally used by cobblers or shoe repairers in Ghana. They move around the city and then they hit it and it makes these sounds and they call people to repair their shoes.
I'm sure people can see why I'm so moved by Ibrahim's work. So off camera, while you were watching the video, he was telling me that he collected all of those shoemaker boxes and he put everything together. Okay, say it. Tell us how this installation came about. Sorry.
Yes, so the piece that you saw is titled Non-Orientable in Cancer.
Say that again.
Non-Orientable in Cancer.
Non-Orientable in Cancer.
And there are only 4 of them existing in the world. There's one which is in a museum in Miami. There's one which is in the National Gallery of Canada, which is the National Museum in Canada.
You have to speak up.
Okay, and there is one which I have with me here in Ghana, and then the other one is in London. Yeah, so that work, the reason why it's titled Non-Orientable in Cancer is because I started collecting these old shoemaker boxes from some shoemakers in Accra, where I would produce new shoemaker boxes and give it to them and take the old ones, because I was interested in the physical conditions of the boxes and how they look like miniature houses. And in addition to that, there was an old factory in Tema, the old Gehok paint factory, which was later Bridal Paints. I was doing some research looking for materials to produce these boxes, and I found this old factory. Okay. Of course, a lot of the interior of the factory had been taken out, like the machines and all that, but the wood documents, old documents and things had been left in. And in my work, I collect old things. So I went into the factory, which was going to be demolished, and I collected the old things, and I used them in producing these boxes. And after that, I burnt part of them and things like that. So the work, part of it ended up in an exhibition in London at the White Cube Gallery, and then one also ended up in the Pinchuk Art Center, which is this exhibition space in Ukraine that organizes this major art prize every 2 years for young artists around the world under the age of 35. So at the time, I was selected as one of the young artists finalists. So the exhibition that you saw was the exhibition that marked it. Okay, so what,
basically, so you put everything together in Ghana,
yes,
and then you shipped everything to Ukraine.
Yes.
Did the art exhibition, the organizers of that, did they fund the shipping of your work? Did they fund the shipping?
Yes, they did.
Okay.
All the exhibitions I do. I've never bought a ticket in my life traveling anywhere. It's always funded by the institutions.
Okay. So how long did it take you to put together this installation? From production through to shipping to finally putting the whole work up in the museum, Paint Art Center?
Yes. It started off as an experiment in 2013 when I was in art school, but I only showed the work the first time in 2017. So sometimes when you're making an artwork, it takes quite a while. You need to digest, you need to understand what you're doing, test, fail. So for instance, I tested part of the work in many different factories. So in Tema, I tested the work there, I exhibited it. And then also at the Sekondi Railway Locomotive Workshop, I tested the work also there. The reason why I did was because part of the element of the work also came from the railways, because I've also been collecting materials from there for some of the installations I've been producing. And for me, in my work, it's not so much about exhibiting for just a crowd. Sometimes I'm also interested in the relationship between the work and the space that the work finds itself in. So I don't really mind so much if people see it or not. The process of having to actually produce a work with regards to the labor that goes into it and the context of the site itself is a subject for discussion in artistic practice, but normally we don't focus on it. A lot of artists are used to the idea that, oh, I want to produce a painting because I know that there is this hotel that I can go and hang the painting in. That is not the summary of art. There's a lot more conversation that happens within the field of art with regards to what goes into the fabrication.
Okay, so in all of this, you have a unique way of putting your stuff together. You have a unique way of thinking. Do other artists find you weird, or they find you, they think you're a superstar? I want to know how artists in Ghana, let me be specific, do they find you as a competitor, as someone they look up to? How do you relate
I wouldn't
to them?
really say a competitor, but I think artists, we all do inspire each other in one way or the other. I've been inspired by many artists, of course, some of whom have taught us in the university, like one of our professors, Dr. Caricature Seidu, who is an artist himself, Bernard Akwe Jackson, who is a very good friend of mine, Kwesi Ohenia. Some of them are young. There's Bright Akwe, who I think has been on this show before. Of course, also there are many artists who trained in Accra, the Ghanata College. There are artists who trained in Takoradi and many others. But I think always there's some kind of misconception, also with regards to some artistic forms. So, for instance, some artists through their training might believe that if an artist doesn't, let's say, paint or depict the human form, then they're somehow deviating from art. Or if they collect certain materials to produce work, then it somehow doesn't make it art enough. You know, it somehow degenerates. But that's the thinking that goes, sometimes I think is a bit fascist, because back in during the Second World War, when Hitler was purging the Jews, that was the same thought that was going into it, the right to decide that this person can make this art form and this person cannot make, because you know art to be in a certain legitimate form which is in your mind. So sometimes, of course, there are bits of antagonisms here and there from artists, but I think it's also important. Sometimes antagonisms are good. It helps
shape a lot of.
It helps shape a lot of things. Yeah. So it's not smooth. For me, I don't really want to live in a society that is very smooth. It's within these small tensions that sometimes art or certain revolutions are born. Yeah.
Okay. So during this pandemic era, where everybody is resulting and learning to live the new normal, a lot of artists, creative persons are using this time to look into themselves and try to create something that will probably blow our minds after COVID-19 is gone. What have you been working on?
Well, to be honest with you, I've been building. So the institution which we opened in Tamale last year, Savannah Center, there is a sister institution to it called Red Clay, which is this institution made out of bricks, which I've been working on.
Let pause on that.
Yeah.
Pause on that. My director is we're going to watch a video from there, and have our viewers will have a feel of what you're talking about. When we come, you can talk the nitty-gritty. So we're going to take a break and go to Tamale. We're going to the Savannah Center. What's the full name?
Savannah Center for Contemporary Art and Red Clay.
Okay, so the Savannah Center for Contemporary Art and Red Clay is in Tamale. It's something that Ibrahim is pushing hard for. We are going there right now. When we come back into the studio, we get chatting. So.
The construction and fabrication of the Parliament of Ghosts is simply a manifestation between the relationship of play and then seriousness. How do we consolidate that the act of children making spontaneous decisions and moving around freely versus constructing an idea of a parliament which is a structure which has historically governed and made policies and then somehow determined the lives of millions and billions of people around the world. I think it's very important for us to focus on the labor aspect and then find ways in which we can truly democratize the forms that manifest within the 21st century.
Okay, so that is what Ibrahim is up to in Tamale. That is how this is how the Savannah Center for Contemporary Arts and Red Clay, this is the beginning. Okay, so when I saw it off camera, I asked you if it was a swimming pool. There was a swimming pool in there. So what's the story? This is the original installation.
No. This is just a video which I took of the Tamale Sports Stadium, the Ibrahim Mahama Sports Complex,
but
as part of an idea that I'm working on.
Okay. So now tell us. This is the pool I'm talking about.
Okay.
Obviously, it's not a pool.
It's not a pool.
So what is virtually? How's the whole center supposed to look like?
Yeah, there was a video which I thought that he had, that one gives an entire, there's a walkthrough which I go throughout the institution. Yeah, so it's actually a large institution which sits on like a land of several acres, over 50 acres of land. And it's actually it has residence spaces for artists and people that we invite in the future. It has classrooms. It has a library. It has a room for an archive. It has a photography lab. It has exhibition spaces. It has this parliament called the Parliament of Ghosts, which is part of a work that I did for the Manchester International Festival last year in Manchester. But I decided to build the work physically in Ghana, in Tamale. And then it also has 2 cinema halls, which actually I'm building out of these airplanes that I bought from, you know, Starbow. When their planes were grounded, some people bought them and they were just sitting around. So I bought the planes from them and then a couple of other airplanes, and I transported them all the way to Tamale. So there are 6 airplanes. So I've taken the seats out of 3 of these airplanes, and we're using the seats to build these 2 cinema halls. And then inside the airplanes, which are empty, we're transforming them into classrooms. So even when I was in Tamale 2-3 days ago, I was actually working with the welder and my uncle to actually fix some things, like weld the final parts of the interior of the airplane. So when it's done, imagine like when the airplanes that we experience, they're always filled with seats. So you never really see the potentials in them. But when you watch videos of, let's say, people having private jets and things, and you see the interior, you realize that it has so much potential. So imagine what happens when there is a classroom within an airplane, which your children are going to study in. It's a lot more inspiring. So for me, that inspirational quality is important, and objects sometimes can play that role. So the institution is actually vast, and it comprises a lot of different things. So the parliament, which you saw, you mentioned the pool.
Yes.
When we started building it, some people who came to the space always said, "Oh, are you building a swimming pool?" And I said, "No, we're not building a swimming pool. We're building a parliament." And
continue.
And they were like, "No, this looks like a swimming pool." I was like, "No, it's a parliament." And a couple of weeks ago, it rained really heavily in Tamale, and it flooded because we haven't roofed it yet. And the kids in the community, like in the village, they started swimming in it. And I was like, "Oh, maybe they're right. I'm
actually building a pool." But why are you building a parliament in the Parliament of Ghosts? What's the inspiration behind it?
Yeah, so the Parliament of Ghosts actually comes from all these old materials which are collected from the railways back a couple of years ago, when there were a few changes happening here and there. And some of these materials I felt were really important. There were old cabinets and even some of the slippers from the railways, which were being produced in the late 19th century, actually when the railway was being built by the British. And I was invited to do a project in Manchester as part of this major arts festival that happens every 2 years called the Manchester International Festival. And as artists, sometimes you are called to respond to specific cities and the histories of those. And you know, Manchester had the heart of the Industrial Revolution, cotton plantation. And then the ABC wax. Yes. So, and the railway and all that contributed significantly to the extraction of raw materials and all that. So I was interested in building an artwork that would bring the conversation back within the 21st century. So I actually collected, I had these materials, which were some old seats from the trains that were used in Ghana during the independence and post-independent period. So I took them to Manchester together with these cabinets that were 130 years old, and I literally built a parliament which resembled the British Parliament. And it was actually a critique of the Brexit at the time, looking at the Brexit and then the relationship between the UK, the Commonwealth. It was, when the Brits at the time were thinking about Brexit, you don't really think about your relation to the rest of the world, particularly when you're constantly taking and extracting or exploiting others. But suddenly people are saying, "Oh, we don't want to be part of the Europe anymore because other people are coming to take our jobs." But sometimes it's all very nonsensical, because once we go back into history,
all the time,
we go back into history, realize that we are much more interconnected than we are. And that's what, so this work in Tamale is actually supposed to be a much more bigger version of this parliament, which actually uses objects from our own history to build a parliament where, for instance, cinema can happen, lectures can happen within it, we can have TEDx talks, community members can have. So it's actually a space of freedom by using the materials that we would throw away.
That's amazing stuff. So we are looking to see, after the Savannah Center for Contemporary Arts and Red Clay is done, we are looking to see Tamale as probably the next contemporary art hub in Ghana, where it's a one-stop shop for everything.
Yes.
You kept saying we.
Yes.
Oh, and we.
Yes.
Do you have any partners? Is it just you? Are you partnering other artists?
When I say we, it's also because I speak in terms of community building.
Okay.
So, for instance, I work with a lot of people at the institution. So I have Esinam Damale, who's an artist who works with us at the Savannah Center, she literally holds the whole institution together. We have Selam Koji Ibrahim, who is the artistic director of SCC, Savannah Center. So he actually works on the programming and all that. And then we have Mashoud, who is like the administrator. We have Salah, who is a librarian. We have Enes Sakite, who is also an artist. He's doing his national service with us. But he's currently the one who is teaching like the drone technologies and all those things at the university. And we also have members, artists from the university, like Kwesi Ohiniaye, Bernard Okwe Jackson, and the members of the Black Star Lines team at the KNUST, who work with us in a position to advise us, even with regards to like how we develop programming in the institution and run it. So I refer to that.
I'm sure that my team and I will be visiting the center in Tamale soon, so that we can put together a documentary before and after. So before you leave us, have you had any qualms or funny events regarding your name, Ibrahim Mahama?
All the time. All the time. It used to be much earlier. When you Googled my name, the first thing that came was Lamborghini, money, scandals, and things like that. And sometimes I do enjoy it. I think that it's interesting.
Yeah, you should. Yeah, you should.
It's a bit interesting, yeah. Of course, there was once an article which I read online, which was, there was a journalist who was trying so hard here to really write on my work, but he didn't know the distinction between Ibrahim Mahama and Ibrahim Mahama.
Ibrahim Mahama, the businessman, and Ibrahim Mahama, the artist.
So he started by saying, oh, Ibrahim Mahama is not just a businessman who owns blah blah blah, listed properties, cars, but he's also an artist. And then he put a work of mine. I was like, that's interesting.
So the first time I heard your name as well, I'm like, oh, does he do art too? And then that's how come the conversation started. Okay, so where do we find you on social media? How do we follow your work?
It's on Facebook. It's just Ibrahim Mahama. And then on Twitter it's also Ibrahim Mahama, and then Instagram is Ibrahim Mahama 3.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Final words before we wrap up. Anything you want to add to our conversation that I haven't asked you?
Well, I think that it's important that we really do support the creative art community. Here, like the state in itself has to invest a lot into arts and culture. And secondly, also, to the artists and practitioners, I think that is very, very important for us to also take responsibility for our practice and what we produce. I mostly watch the news, like you were asking me this question about the celebrity thing, and there are a lot of artists, both within the field of music, acting and all that, who are much more focused on how to build their image rather than the service that they give to their community. And I think that it's very important that we somehow focus on this service and also somehow invest ourselves, and also with regards to, of course, I know it's not every artist that makes a strong living out of the work that they make, but if you do make a strong living out of your work, I think that it's a responsibility on your part. What prevents a team of musicians coming together to create studios for young artists to experiment and also to advance experimentation within music, or even to create spaces that, because every time there's a music concert, you're going to the dome, but there could be experimental spaces, you know. So in order for us to be able to grow the cultural scene within this country and within the region, artists need to take responsibility for recreating spaces. And I think that can only come through a certain sense of humbling and also re-educating ourselves within our fields.
Okay.
Yeah.
That sounds nice, like I've been schooled coming from the Ibrahim Mahama. Thank you very much for passing through. And I'll take you on that. I'm going to come to Tamale, come to the studios, and then have a look at what you're doing and then put it out there. Thank you very much. Continue with the good work. And please remember to stay safe and protected. Not too much talking, and stay home when you have to. That was Ibrahim Mahama, He's been my guest. We've had an amazing conversation about contemporary arts and the amazing stuff he's doing. You can follow him on Instagram, on Facebook, Twitter.
Yes.
Are you on Snapchat?
No,
I'm
old school.
I see your Snapchat with a filter, like a hat filter or something.
But they should also follow the Savannah Center for Contemporary Arts, which is SCCA Tamale on both Facebook
SCCA Tamale on
yes.
Facebook and Instagram.
Yes.
So, Ibrahim Mahama to you guys.